Beneath the glittering streets of Paris sleeps an entire city of bones. This is not just a dark tourist stop. It is the medieval catacombs, a labyrinth holding 6 million skeletons and centuries of buried secrets. By the end of this journey, you will understand how a public health crisis created an empire of the dead and what whispers still echo in those shadowy tunnels. We will uncover why revolutionary leaders might be hidden in the anonymous walls and who built a secret cinema 3 stories underground. What does it truly mean to walk over a forgotten world? The stench of death had become a permanent feature of Parisian life. By the 1770s, the city's cemeteries were not just full, they were catastrophically overflowing. At the center of this crisis was the Cemetery of the Holy Innocents, a burial ground so ancient it had been in use for over 1,000 years. Imagine a space the size of a city block, packed layer upon layer with generations of the dead. The practice was to dig massive common pits, fill them with bodies, cover them with a thin layer of soil, and then, once the flesh had decomposed, exhume the bones to make room for the newly deceased. But the system had completely broken down. The city's population was booming and death rates were high. There was simply no more room. The pits at Les Innocents were so saturated that they stopped decomposing bodies properly. A foul, greasy liquid known as cemetery water began seeping into the cellars of surrounding homes and contaminating the wells. The air for blocks around was thick with a miasma so potent it was said to extinguish candles and turn wine sour in the cellar. But the final, horrifying breaking point came in the spring of 1780. A basement wall adjacent to the cemetery, under the immense pressure of the overstuffed mass grave behind it, catastrophically collapsed. A tidal wave of bones and putrid earth flooded into the cellar of a poor house on Rue de la Lingerie. This was no longer a spiritual or sentimental issue, it was a dire emergency. Disease was rampant, and the authorities could no longer ignore the screaming public health threat festering in the heart of the city. The solution, while macabre, was a feat of grimly practical engineering. Beneath their feet, Paris sat atop a vast network of abandoned limestone quarries, tunnels dug over centuries to build the city above. The Royal Council made a decree to empty the cemeteries and transfer the contents into the subterranean voids. It was a decision born of sheer necessity, a way to cleanse the living city by creating a dedicated city for the dead. The task was monumental, to discreetly move the remains of millions of people. And so, under the cover of night, a silent procession began, black-draped wagons laden with bones making their way from the overflowing cemeteries to a single, discreet gate leading down into the darkness. This was not a burial, it was a relocation project of unimaginable scale, the birth of the empire of shadows we now call the Catacombs. For 2 years, every sunset in Paris marked the beginning of a ghostly migration. Starting in 1786, a solemn nightly ritual unfolded across the city. Teams of workers, the first of the cataphiles, descended into the putrid, overstuffed pits of the Cemetery of the Holy Innocents. Their task was not for the faint of heart to carefully disinter centuries of tangled skeletons, clean the bones and stack them into carts. As darkness fell, a procession of black-draped wagons, their cargo hidden from public view, would rumble through the silent streets. Their destination was a single, unassuming portal into the underworld, an old quarry entrance at the Tom Issoire Gate in the southern part of the city. Think of the logistics, the sheer physical labor involved. Each bone was handled, each skull respectfully placed. This was not a hasty dumping of remains, it was a meticulous, almost reverent relocation. For 2 solid years, this nightly transfer continued just to empty the single cemetery of Les Innocents, and that was only the beginning. The project expanded, reaching into parish cemeteries all across Paris. The work continued intermittently for decades, finally concluding in the 1860s. Over those 80 years, the remains from dozens of cemeteries, convents, and hospitals were brought into the labyrinth. 6 million individual souls were given a new collective home in the dark. The scale is almost impossible to comprehend, a silent city built below from the fragments of the city above. But what did the workers find as they stacked these bones in the darkness? And what strange patterns began to emerge from the chaos of history? Into that sprawling darkness came a man with a peculiar vision, a quarry inspector named Louis-Étienne François Héricourt de Thury. He looked at the chaotic piles of bones being deposited in the damp tunnels and saw not just a storage problem, but an opportunity. In the early 1800s, he was tasked with transforming this grim repository into something ordered, stable, and strangely meaningful. His work gave the catacombs their unforgettable face. He directed workers to build what are known as hags, long, neat walls constructed entirely from stacked bones. Femurs and tibias were laid in careful, geometric patterns, their ends facing outward to create a grimly textured surface. To support the low ceilings of the quarry tunnels, they built pillars and arches, again using bones as their primary masonry. And punctuating these walls were what he called the ronds de service, rings of service, which are actually decorative arrangements of skulls embedded directly into the bone masonry. These were not random piles, they were the architecture of death, designed for both structural integrity and a profound visual impact. But Héricourt de Thury's vision went beyond mere engineering. He wanted the catacombs to be a visitable space, a place for the living to confront mortality. Along the routes he designated, he placed stone tablets bearing sobering inscriptions in French and Latin. One reads, "Stop, this is the empire of death." Another, near an altar-like structure built from bones, asks the visitor to remember their own inevitable fate. He turned chaotic tunnels into a curated, almost sacred museum. Walking through his ossuary was meant to be a philosophical exercise, a memento mori on a monumental scale. It was a deliberate attempt to bring order to the chaos of 6 million anonymous lives, and to make the public consider the thin line between the bustling city above and the silent city below. Yet, even as he imposed this solemn order, the sheer scale of the catacombs ensured that countless secrets remained buried in the unvisited tunnels branching off from his neat, instructive path. The neat bone walls and somber inscriptions exist only because of a much older hollow space. The true foundation of the catacombs is not death but stone. For centuries before the first bone was laid, the ground beneath Paris was being systematically carved out to build the city rising above it. This story begins in the time of the Romans, who first discovered the rich seams of limestone, a perfect building material lying just beneath the topsoil. They started the excavation, quarrying the stone to construct their temples, walls, and the first iteration of the city, then known as Lutetia. This practice never truly stopped. As Paris grew through the medieval period and into the Renaissance, the demand for stone was insatiable. Architects needed it for cathedrals like Notre Dame, kings required it for palaces like the Louvre, and the growing populace used it for their homes and city walls. So, generation after generation of quarrymen, known as carriers, descended with picks and lanterns. They followed the limestone veins, extracting block after block, and in doing so, they left behind a staggering void. They created a subterranean mirror image of the streets above, a sprawling, uncharted honeycomb of tunnels, galleries, and chambers. The scale is almost incomprehensible. Today, the mapped network of these old quarries stretches for over 200 miles beneath the city. To put that in perspective, if you could lay all the tunnels end to end, they would reach from Paris to Brussels. The official ossuary, the part lined with bones that tourists can visit, is just a tiny fraction of this, a carefully curated mile-and-a-half path through an immense and mostly empty darkness. This unchecked excavation created a silent crisis. By the late 18th century, the ground beneath Paris was essentially Swiss cheese. With no central planning or records, quarries had been dug recklessly, often undermining the very foundations of the neighborhoods above. Streets and buildings began to simply vanish, swallowed by sudden, catastrophic collapses. The most famous of these was the 1774 collapse of a large section of Rue d'Enfer, a street whose name ironically means Hell Street. This was the final warning. The city could not ignore the literal instability beneath its feet. In response, King Louis XVI established a special agency called the Inspection Générale des Carrières, the General Inspectorate of Quarries. Their mission was monumental: to map the entire chaotic labyrinth, assess its stability, and reinforce it. Teams of engineers and surveyors, the true pioneers of the underground, began the dangerous work of charting the unknown. They built the sturdy stone pillars and arches we see today, shoring up ceilings to prevent disaster. They inscribed the names of the streets above onto the tunnel walls, creating the first reliable subterranean map. This agency, which still exists today, didn't just make the catacombs possible, they saved the city of Paris from sinking into its own past. But in stabilizing this shadow world, they also formalized its borders, creating a known realm and, by contrast, an even more mysterious uncharted territory beyond their reinforcing walls. The modern entrance to this empire of death is deceptively ordinary. In the bustling traffic circle of Place Denfert-Rochereau, amid the sound of cars and city life, stands a small, green, pavilion-like building. It looks like a quaint garden shed or a forgotten subway entrance. This is the official portal. You purchase a ticket, pass through a turnstile, and the transition begins. A narrow spiral staircase of black iron coils downward into the earth. 130 steps. With each rotation, the daylight from above shrinks to a distant coin of white, then vanishes entirely. The temperature drops sharply, a good 10 degrees, replaced by a constant, damp chill that seeps into your clothes. The air changes, losing the dry scent of the city and gaining a moist, mineral-heavy smell like wet stone and ancient soil. Your own footsteps and the murmur of other visitors are joined by a new soundtrack, the steady, solitary plink of water dripping from the ceiling into shallow puddles on the limestone floor. At the bottom of the stairs, a long, rough-hewn tunnel stretches ahead, dimly lit by electric bulbs caged in wire. You walk for a minute, the modern world now entirely absent, until you reach a stone archway. And there, carved deeply into the lintel above the passage, are the words that have greeted visitors for 2 centuries. They are in French, Arrête, c'est ici l'empire de la mort. Stop, this is the empire of death. It is not a warning of physical danger, but a philosophical threshold. You cross under that inscription, and you leave the realm of the living behind. You have entered the curated silence of the ossuary, the 1.5-mile path through the bone-lined galleries. But what most visitors do not realize is that this official path is merely a single, well-lit corridor in a sprawling, dark continent. For every step taken on the sanctioned route, there are 100 miles of tunnels stretching away into absolute blackness, a hidden world that has developed its own rules, its own explorers, and its own startling secrets. The tunnel beyond the arch is a quiet, narrowing throat of stone. You walk on a gravel path, the rough-hewn walls pressing close, their surfaces marked by the pick strokes of medieval quarrymen. Faint numbers and letters are carved into the rock here and there, cryptic codes left by those early surveyors mapping the void. Small plaques tell fragments of the story, of the quarries, of the collapses, of the decision to bring the dead down into the dark. The air is still and cool, the only sound the soft crunch of footsteps and that eternal, distant dripping of water. The lighting is dim, casting long shadows that seem to move just at the edge of vision. This walk is a deliberate decompression, a sensory stripping away of the world above, meant to prepare you for what comes next. You follow a gentle curve in the passage, the electric bulbs becoming fewer, the darkness between them deeper. And then you turn a corner, your breath catches, the rough limestone walls vanish, replaced by a smooth, continuous facade of bones. It is not a haphazard pile, it is a wall, a structure. Thousands upon thousands of femurs and tibias are stacked horizontally like grim lumber, their rounded ends creating a patterned, textured surface that stretches into the gloom. At regular intervals, a line of skulls is embedded in the bonework, their empty sockets gazing forward in a silent, collective stare. This is the first of the Hagues, the bone walls engineered by Heracart de Thury. The initial shock is not one of horror, but of sheer, staggering scale. Your mind struggles to reconcile the single, neat skull with the wall that contains it, and then with the realization that this wall is just the beginning of a mile-long gallery. The sheer quantity of lives represented here is an abstract number until you are standing 3 feet from its physical proof. A profound quiet usually falls over visitors in this moment. The chatter stops. You are in the presence of something immense and solemn. This is the Empire of Death, and you are a temporary guest in its silent, ordered city. You feel a strange mixture of awe at the human effort it took to build this place, and a humbling sense of your own tiny, temporary place in a very long story. You walk slowly, the bone walls rising on both sides, the ceiling low enough to feel the weight of the city above. You pass pillars built from skulls and femurs, arches that frame side passages leading off into utter blackness. The curated path keeps you safe, but your eyes are drawn to those dark openings, wondering what lies beyond the neat, arranged facade and who or what might have found a home in the endless dark behind the bones. These carefully arranged bones are accompanied by a voice. As you walk the dim galleries, your eyes are drawn not just to the skeletal architecture, but to rectangular stone plaques set into the walls at intervals. These are not casual markers, they are deliberate messages from the past, carved for the living who would one day pass by. Their words transform the catacombs from a mere repository into a site of profound meditation. One of the most famous, placed near the entrance to the ossuary, reads in French, "You who live and flourish on the earth, remember you will one day be as we are." It is a direct, sobering address. The inscription does not whisper, it declares. It collapses 6 million individual stories into a single, unifying truth that awaits every visitor. Another plaque, written in Latin, states simply, "The day of death is better than the day of birth." This is not morbid pessimism, but a classic Christian memento mori, a reminder that a life judged well is the ultimate goal. These texts were carefully selected by the quarry inspector Heracart de Thury in the early 1800s. Their purpose was deeply intentional. Paris had just passed through the seismic upheaval of the Revolution, a period that challenged old religious and monarchical certainties. The Enlightenment had championed reason, but here, in the damp dark, was a counterpoint, a reminder of human fragility and eternal truths. The catacombs were meant to be an educational experience, a physical manifestation of a moral lesson. By confronting the sheer scale of death, the bourgeois visitor of the 19th century was to be reminded of humility, morality, and the fleeting nature of worldly pursuits. The inscriptions are the script for this underground sermon, turning a walk among the dead into a philosophical exercise, but the message is not conveyed by words alone. The path is punctuated by small, solemn structures that break the monotony of bone walls. You might round a corner to find a simple stone cross embedded in a niche of skulls, or a miniature altar built from fragments of tombstone. One of the most poignant is the Fontaine du Samaritain, the Samaritan fountain. It is a small, carved stone basin set into a pillar, once fed by a natural spring that dripped from the ceiling. The name references the biblical story of a traveler offering life-giving water to a stranger. In this context, surrounded by dryness and dust, it symbolized a tiny offer of spiritual refreshment, a gesture of compassion in the empire of death. Even more personal is the tomb of the Gilbert family. In a rare exception to the anonymity of the ossuary, a small, decorative monument was erected here to hold the remains of a single wealthy family, their names preserved while millions around them are unknown. It stands as a quiet testament to the human desire to be remembered, a solitary candle of identity in a sea of forgotten darkness. These altars and crosses serve as emotional waypoints. They are places where the overwhelming, impersonal mass of humanity is briefly interrupted by a gesture of faith, a moment of individual remembrance, or a symbol of hope. They ask the visitor to pause, not just in fear of death, but in contemplation of what a life means before it joins this silent congregation. The bones show us the inevitable end, but these inscriptions and shrines ask us to consider the path we take to get there. And as you move from these curated moments of reflection, the path leads you deeper toward a space where history took a much darker and more chaotic turn. The patterns in the bone walls are not random art, they are a language. Look closely at the most famous sections. You will see long bones, primarily femurs and tibias, laid in neat, horizontal courses like bricks in a wall. Their rounded ends face outward, creating a strangely textured, almost woven surface. Interspersed at regular intervals are rows of skulls, their hollow orbits forming dark punctuation marks in the pale masonry. This is the iconic skull and crossbones motif, repeated thousands of times. The arrangement was first and foremost an engineering solution. When the quarry inspector Hericat de Thury took charge, he faced a mountain of disorganized remains. Simply piling them would be unstable, a potential collapse waiting to happen in the already fragile tunnels. By stacking the long bones in tight, interlocking rows and using the denser skulls as structural anchors, his workers created stable, load-bearing walls. They were literally building with the materials they had, turning a logistical nightmare into grimly effective architecture, but the symbolism was just as intentional. The repetitive, geometric design imposes a chilling order on the chaos of mortality. One skull is a person, a story. 1,000 skulls in a perfect grid become a pattern, a concept. This visual transformation was a deliberate act of sanitization and dignity. The bones brought here were from public graves, often disturbed and decayed, a source of disease and horror for the living above. By washing them, sorting them, and arranging them with such precise care, the authorities were performing a final act of respect. They were converting a public health nuisance into a solemn monument. This orderly presentation strips death of its immediate terror and replaces it with a quiet, overwhelming awe. It becomes a memento mori, a reminder of death but on a civic scale. You are not looking at a single grave, you are looking at the fate of an entire city, rendered with a calm, geometric inevitability. The message is clear. In the end, we are all part of the same pattern, our individualities absorbed into a grand, silent design that has been building beneath the streets for centuries. Yet amid this vast anonymity, whispers of famous names cling to the walls. The catacombs are a democracy of the dead, but legend insists a few notorious citizens rest here in secret. When the cemeteries of Paris were emptied, they did not discriminate, gathering bones from the graves of paupers and princes alike. This leads to one of the enduring mysteries. Could the leaders of the French Revolution be hidden within these anonymous stacks? After their executions by guillotine in 1793 and 1794, radicals like Maximilien Robespierre and Georges Danton, along with the brilliant chemist Antoine Lavoisier, were not given dignified burials. Their bodies, like thousands of others, were tossed into quicklime-filled trenches at the former Erancis cemetery and the cemetery of the Madeleine. These were not marked graves, but mass pits designed to hasten decomposition and erase memory. When those very cemeteries were cleared decades later as part of the Great Transfer, all the remains from those pits were brought underground. So in a very real sense, the bones of these world-changing figures are almost certainly here, commingled with those of their enemies and the ordinary citizens caught in the terror. But which skull is Robespierre's, which femur belonged to Danton? There is no marker, no plaque, no possible way to know. the revolutionary firebrands who sought to remake society were ultimately reduced to the same silent, equal state as everyone else, their identities dissolved into the geometric patterns of the Hagues. This anonymity is the catacombs' ultimate irony, a final, absolute equality imposed by time and bureaucracy. An even stranger claim emerged in 1897. Workers reinforcing a section of the quarry stumbled upon a sealed niche containing a single, well-preserved lead coffin. Inside was a skeleton, and with it a copper plaque inscribed with a name and a date. The plaque identified the occupant as La Belle Ferronnière, the beautiful wife of an ironmonger, a famed beauty of the 16th century court who was allegedly a mistress of King Francis I. According to the inscription, she had died in the 1540s and her remains had been moved here from a demolished church. For a moment, it seemed a singular identity had been rescued from the void. The skeleton and plaque were placed on display in the ossuary, a rare-named guest in the Empire of Death. But historians quickly raised doubts. The style of the coffin and the engraving seemed much newer, perhaps from the 18th century. The story itself mirrored a famous portrait by Leonardo da Vinci, also called La Belle Ferronnière, creating a tantalizing but likely fabricated connection. Was this a genuine archaeological find, or an elaborate hoax placed by a romantic quarry worker centuries ago? The mystery was never solved. The bones and the plaque eventually vanished from public view, leaving only the enduring legend. These stories of famous faces, from revolutionary giants to legendary beauties, highlight a deep human need. We walk through that overwhelming anonymity and instinctively search for a single story to hold onto, a known name to make the scale feel personal. But the catacombs steadfastly refuse to give up such secrets. They are a monument to the collective, a reminder that in the darkness, all stories eventually blend into one. While the bones of the ancients were being stacked with solemn order, the living chaos of the revolution raged in the streets above. In the turbulent 1790s, the unmapped quarries beyond the ossuary walls became a sanctuary for the hunted. As the reign of terror took hold, royalists, priests refusing to swear allegiance to the new state, and political fugitives found their way into the darkness. They navigated by flickering candlelight, slipping through forgotten entrances in cellars or garden grottos, disappearing into a maze the revolutionary authorities scarcely knew existed. Here in damp, pitch-black galleries far from the official bone-lined paths, they hid for days or weeks. Secret meetings were held in natural caverns, their whispers absorbed by the stone. There are persistent legends of hidden printing presses operating deep below, producing pamphlets and royalist propaganda that would then be smuggled back to the surface, a literal underground resistance. The quarries provided more than just hiding, they offered a grim, ironic utility. The same limestone that built the palaces of the monarchy now sheltered those fighting for its return. But the revolution did not just use the quarries, it fed them. The violence above had a direct and bloody connection to the world below. During the September massacres of 1792, when mobs stormed Parisian prisons, many victims were not given burials. Their bodies were sometimes unceremoniously dumped into open quarry shafts or abandoned tunnels, temporary graves in the city's basement. Later, when the guillotine worked relentlessly at Place de la Révolution, the remains of its victims, from aristocrats to ordinary citizens deemed enemies of the state, were often treated with similar disregard. They were frequently interred in quicklime-filled trenches at cemeteries like the Madeleine or Arancis, pits designed for erasure, not remembrance. And when those very cemeteries were cleared years later, as part of the ongoing ossuary project, all those bones, revolutionary and counter-revolutionary alike, were gathered up. They were carted by night into the catacombs, washed and stacked into the anonymous walls. So the tunnels absorbed not just medieval Paris, but revolutionary Paris too. The very individuals who might have once hidden in the quarries could, in a terrible twist of fate, later have their own bones brought down to join the silent multitude. The catacombs became a physical archive of the city's most violent transformation, a place where the victims and the vanquished of a decade of turmoil were finally, quietly merged into one. The silence of the ossuary holds only one chapter of the story. Centuries after the last bone was placed, the catacombs were called to serve the living once more, this time in a global conflict. When Nazi forces occupied Paris in the summer of 1940, the city above fell under strict control, but the city below became a sanctuary. The vast, unmapped labyrinth offered the French resistance something priceless: complete invisibility. Far from the official tourist path, in damp, pitch-black chambers known only to a few, resistance fighters established secret headquarters. They navigated using old quarry maps and marked their routes with subtle scratches on the walls, a code understood only by the initiated. In these hidden rooms, powered by clandestine electrical lines tapped from the grid above, they operated radio transmitters, coordinating with Allied forces and passing vital intelligence. They ran mimeograph machines, printing anti-Nazi leaflets and underground newspapers that would then be smuggled to the surface, spreading hope and information under the enemy's nose. The catacombs became a literal underground network, its arteries carrying the lifeblood of the resistance, but the Germans were not ignorant of this subterranean world. They too recognized its strategic value. In a stunning feat of covert engineering, German military engineers constructed a massive, fortified bunker beneath the Lycée Montaigne, a prestigious high school in the 6th arrondissement. They sealed off a section of the quarries and built a concrete citadel deep within the earth, complete with reinforced walls, independent power and water supplies, and secure communications lines. This bunker was designed as a bomb-proof command and communications center, a place where the occupation authorities could continue to operate even during Allied air raids. It was a fortress within a crypt, a stark symbol of how both the hunter and the hunted could occupy the same shadow realm. For the resistance fighter creeping through a narrow, dripping tunnel with a packet of leaflets, the catacombs were a shield. For the German officer in his concrete bunker, they were a strategic stronghold. This duality captures the essence of the place, a neutral territory of stone and darkness, eternally repurposed by whoever needs its secrets. The tunnels witnessed no battles, but they hosted a silent, shadow war where information was the weapon and secrecy was survival, proving that even an empire of the dead could play a decisive role in the fight for the future. Philibert Aspert's name is now a permanent resident of the darkness. In 1793, as revolutionary fervor gripped Paris above, this simple doorkeeper for the Val de Grace Hospital descended a staircase from the hospital cellar, carrying a lantern and a bottle of brandy. His goal, according to legend, was to find a cache of fine liqueurs rumored to be hidden in the old quarries. He stepped into the unmapped void and vanished. For 11 long years, he was simply missing, one more soul swallowed by the city. Then, in 1804, quarry inspectors working to shore up a distant tunnel made a grim discovery. They found a skeleton, its clothes mostly rotted away, lying near a rough staircase that led up to a grate. That grate opened onto a street, Rue d'Enfer, but it was locked from the outside. The man had found an exit but could not reach it. Beside the bones lay a rusted set of keys and the remnants of a bottle. His hospital keys identified him. Philibert Aspert had been found just 300 feet from freedom after a decade of being lost in a maze of his own city. His story is the catacombs' most famous cautionary tale. It illustrates with chilling clarity that the real danger was never the dead, but the geography of the living stone. Without a map, a reliable light source, or an understanding of the quarry's endless, repeating passages, a single wrong turn meant a death sentence. The darkness was absolute, the silence complete, and the echoes could trick you into walking in circles until your light failed and hope drained away. In a gesture of somber respect, the quarry authorities buried Aspert right where he fell. They built a simple tombstone from the limestone of the walls, inscribing it with his name, the date of his disappearance, and a brief epitaph. His grave remains there today, deep in the unofficial tunnels, a solitary, named monument in the empire of anonymous death. To stand before it is to feel a profound chill. Here lies not a curated skeleton from centuries past, but a man who wandered from the world of gaslight and revolution into a timeless dark, and who serves as a permanent reminder that some who enter the labyrinth never leave. Philibert Aspert's lonely grave is a monument to the catacombs' perilous past, but it also marks the beginning of a very different story. That same darkness which claimed a lost doorkeeper would later become a canvas for a secret, thriving subculture. For decades, the official ossuary has been just a sanitized facade, while the true heart of the catacombs beats in the hundreds of miles of forbidden tunnels beyond the tourist path. This is the realm of the cataphiles, the modern urban explorers who treat the underworld as their private playground, workshop, and sanctuary. Their activities remained the stuff of rumor until a police raid in 2004 ripped back the curtain. Officers, acting on a tip about stolen cabling, descended into an unmarked service entrance and followed a trail of extension cords snaking through the dark. What they found deep in a chamber near the Place de la Concorde was not a thieves' den, but a scene of surreal normalcy. It was a fully functional movie theater. The room had been carefully cleared of debris, its walls smoothed. A large screen was mounted on one wall, facing rows of seats salvaged from old cinemas. A professional-grade film projector sat on a stand connected to a generator. A stocked bar offered drinks, and most astonishingly, a working telephone line had been illegally tapped from the city grid above, allowing for a dial tone 3 stories beneath the Parisian streets. This was not a crude hideout, it was a meticulously curated social space, a testament to hundreds of hours of laborious, secret work. The discovery of the cinema revealed the astonishing ambition of the cataphile community. But that was only the most famous installation. Explorers have since documented and built countless other intrusions into the silent stone. In other chambers, police and inspectors have stumbled upon fully furnished lounges complete with sofas, rugs, bookcases filled with novels, and even electricity for lamps and stereo systems. Some rooms have been transformed into elaborate art galleries, their walls covered in murals, sculptures, and intricate carvings left as permanent, if illicit, contributions to the underground landscape. In one of the most daring feats of engineering, a group excavated and sealed a section of tunnel, then filled it with clean water pumped from a natural seep, creating a clandestine swimming pool in the absolute dark. These spaces are not for vandalism, they are for living. The cataphiles operate by a strict, if unofficial, code. They take immense pains to avoid damaging the historic structure or the ossuary areas. They remove their own trash, often using the same secret routes to haul in building materials and haul out waste. Their motivation is complex, a mix of rebellion against the controlled city above, the thrill of accessing forbidden space, and a genuine, almost spiritual connection to the quiet enormity of the labyrinth. They navigate using detailed maps passed among initiates, recognizing landmarks with names like the beach, the fountain of the Virgin, or the chamber of the dragon. To them, the catacombs are not a tomb, but the network, a living, breathing counter-city. This secret world exists in a constant, quiet tension with the authorities. The Inspection Générale des Carrières, the same agency that shored up the quarries centuries ago, now patrols for these intrusions, sealing entrances and dismantling installations when they are found. Yet for every room they close, another seems to appear deeper in the maze. It is an endless game of hide and seek played out in total darkness, a modern human impulse to create and congregate, pushing persistently against the ancient, absorbing silence of the stone. These secret lounges and cinemas are modern graffiti on ancient walls, but the original artists left their signatures in a far more permanent way. Look past the stacked bones and into the stone itself, and you will find the quarrymen's footprints. Every inch of these tunnels is a historical document carved by hand. The walls are not smooth, they are textured with thousands of parallel grooves, the unmistakable scars of the medieval pickaxe. Each stroke represents a heave of effort, a chip of limestone pried loose to build a cathedral or a palace above. The angle and depth of these marks can tell a trained eye which way the worker was standing, how he swung his tool, even whether he was right or left-handed. But the most personal signatures are the mason's marks. Scattered throughout the tunnels, often near intersections or supporting pillars, you will find small, carefully carved symbols. A simple star, a crescent moon, a stylized flower, or a set of initials. These are not random doodles, they were the quarryman's professional signature. In an era before standardized paychecks, a worker would carve his unique mark into the stone blocks he quarried. When those blocks were delivered to the building site, his mark proved his labor, ensuring he received his proper wages. Down here in the dark, these same marks were etched near his work as a record, a way of saying, "I was here, I built this." They are the autographs of the anonymous builders who hollowed out the city's foundation. Their work was phenomenally dangerous, and the structures they left behind to prevent disaster are just as telling. As you walk, you will notice sturdy pillars and arches built from the same limestone, seamlessly merging with the tunnel walls. These are not natural formations, they are the life-saving reinforcements installed by the Inspection Générale des Carrières starting in the late 1700s. Their engineers systematically shored up the most unstable sections, transforming a chaotic honeycomb into a somewhat stable network. Often, you will find dates painted in faded white or black on the ceiling above these pillars, like 1824 or 1851. These are inspection dates, bureaucratic stamps confirming that this section was checked and secured. Even the height of the tunnel tells a story. Low, cramped passages with rough, uneven ceilings are usually the oldest, from the medieval period when quarrymen simply followed the best stone seam with little concern for comfort. Taller, more uniform galleries often indicate later, more systematic extraction, sometimes from the 17th or 18th centuries. But the constant, lurking fear for all these workers, and later for the city above, was the fontis. This is the French term for a sinkhole, a sudden collapse where the ceiling of a quarry, weakened by water seepage or poor excavation, would give way. These were not gradual events. One moment the ground beneath a street or a house was solid, the next it vanished into a gaping pit. Old quarry maps are dotted with these markings, warning of zones of extreme instability. The inspector's most critical job was to find and reinforce these potential fontis before they could swallow the world above. So every pillar, every dated ceiling, every carefully mapped tunnel is a scar from a battle against the earth itself, a permanent record of the human effort required to keep the city from falling into its own skeleton. The stone down here is never truly dry. Listen closely beyond the silence and you will hear it, the constant, solitary plink of water finding its way through cracks in the ceiling, collecting in shallow pools on the floor. This is not a stagnant place, it is alive with a hidden hydrology, a slow, persistent river system flowing through the bones of the past. Long before the dead arrived, water was the quarryman's constant companion and his greatest adversary. As they hacked limestone from the earth, they would often strike ancient aquifers or follow seams of damp rock. Small streams would spring to life on the gallery floors, clear, cold water cutting miniature canyons through the dust and debris. The workers used this water, channeling it to settle dust or to mix mortar for their reinforcing pillars. But this same life-giving resource was also a relentless agent of decay. Water seeping through the ceiling would slowly dissolve the limestone's natural binders, weakening the roof until, without warning, it could give way in a catastrophic fontis, a sinkhole that could swallow the street above. To manage this threat, the later engineers of the Inspection Générale des Carrières built something remarkable within the darkness: proper aqueducts. The most famous is the Aqueduct de la Vanne, a broad, brick-lined channel built in the late 19th century to carry a diverted stream safely through the quarry network. preventing it from undermining the foundations of the Montparnasse neighborhood. Walking beside it today, you see a stark contrast, the rough, pick-marked medieval walls giving way to a smooth, arched Victorian tunnel, a piece of civic infrastructure buried deep underground, silently doing its job for over a century. Yet amid these grand engineering works, there is a much smaller, more human artifact. Tucked into a side gallery far from the official path is a feature known as the Bain de Pieds des Carriers, the quarrymen's footbath. It is a simple, rectangular basin carved directly into the living rock, fed by a perpetual trickle of clean water from a fissure. Here, after a grueling day of swinging picks in the dust-choked dark, the workers would sit on the stone ledge and soak their aching feet in the cool, clear flow. This humble basin is perhaps the most poignant relic in the entire labyrinth. It speaks not of death or engineering or rebellion, but of simple, physical relief. It is a testament to the daily grind of the men who built this void, a small moment of comfort carved into the endless stone. In that simple act of washing away the day's toil, they left behind a ghostly imprint of their humanity, a reminder that even in the deepest dark, life finds a way to pause, to refresh, and to carry on. This silent empire has not been left in peace. The very act of displaying the bones has created a modern dilemma, one that pits respect against morbid curiosity. While millions visit with solemn awe, a small few see the catacombs not as a sacred space, but as a personal trophy cabinet. Over the decades, there have been numerous disturbing incidents of theft. Skulls have vanished from the walls, slipped into backpacks by visitors seeking the ultimate macabre souvenir. In other cases, vandals have not taken bones but rearranged them, building grotesque pyramids or disturbing tableaus, treating the remains of human beings as mere props for a joke. Each act of theft is a double violation, first of the individual whose final rest is disturbed, and second of the collective memory the ossuary was built to preserve. It forces a difficult question: what is this place? Legally, the catacombs are classified as a municipal ossuary, a repository for human remains. They are not a consecrated cemetery in the traditional sense, yet they contain the bones of millions who were buried with Christian rites. This creates a gray area. Are they a historical museum where artifacts can be curated and displayed, or are they essentially a mass grave which demands a specific, unbroken reverence? French authorities walk this tightrope every day. The catacombs are one of Paris's most popular tourist attractions, generating revenue and public interest, but that very popularity puts the remains at risk. The tension came to a head in 2009. After a series of particularly brazen vandalism incidents, including stolen skulls and graffiti sprayed on the historic bone walls, the city made a drastic decision. It closed the entire ossuary to the public for 3 months. It was not a simple cleaning, it was a full-scale restoration project. Workers had to meticulously repair damaged walls, clean graffiti from centuries-old inscriptions, and assess the security of the entire site. The closure sent a clear message. This was not an indestructible exhibit, but a fragile, finite historical resource that could be lost to carelessness and disrespect. The reopening came with tightened security, more cameras, and stricter guidelines for visitors. Yet the battle is not confined to the lit official path. The preservation authorities are also in a constant, quiet war with the most dedicated rogue cataphiles. While many explorers follow a code of leaving no trace, others see the restricted tunnels as a canvas for destruction or a playground for reckless parties. They break through official seals, damage historic reinforcement structures, and leave behind trash that can take authorities days of dangerous work to remove. Each broken seal risks a collapse. Each new tunnel carved weakens the stability of the entire network. So the guardians of the Empire of Death face threats from two fronts: the casual disrespect of the sanctioned tourist and the deliberate intrusion of the illicit explorer. Their mission is to protect both the dead and the living city above them. balancing the human urge to see and to touch with the solemn duty to preserve a story written in bone and stone for centuries to come. Each skull in that silent wall once held a living mind, and every femur supported a person who walked the medieval streets above. While the catacombs are a monument to anonymity, the bones themselves are not silent. To a trained osteologist, the skeletal remains are a detailed archive, etched with the physical story of a life. The very act of stacking them created a chaotic library, but modern science can still read a few pages. The first and most basic information is demographic. By examining the shape of the pelvis and the wear on certain joints, scientists can determine the sex of an individual with reasonable accuracy. Looking at the fusion of growth plates in long bones and the eruption of teeth provides a strong estimate of age at death. From the millions of commingled bones, broad patterns emerge. Studies of samples from the ossuary have painted a stark picture of medieval Parisian life. They reveal a population that died young, with a startlingly high infant and child mortality rate. Many skeletons show signs of chronic malnutrition or repeated periods of starvation, visible in lines of arrested growth on the teeth and bones, like rings on a tree marking a harsh season. The bones also record disease. Some skulls bear the classic lesions of syphilis, a deep pitting and scarring that speaks of a painful, widespread affliction in the centuries before antibiotics. Other bones show the distinctive changes caused by leprosy, where the disease literally consumes the skeletal structure, particularly in the hands and face. Tuberculosis left its mark on the spine, and the pervasive wear on joints tells of a life of relentless physical labor. Fractures are common, many showing signs of clumsy healing, evidence of accidents in a world without modern medicine or safety standards. Perhaps most haunting are the signs of violence: blunt force trauma to the skull, cut marks from blades on ribs and arm bones. These are the final, brutal entries in a person's story. They speak of street fights, warfare, or perhaps the chaos of events like the 100 Years' War, which raged during the period when many of these people lived and died. Diet leaves a chemical signature. Isotope analysis of the bones can reveal whether a person's protein came primarily from land animals or fish, offering clues about social class, as seafood was more accessible to some Parisians living near the Seine than to others. Yet for all this data, the catacombs fiercely guard individual identity. The great transfer and the subsequent stacking of bones by type completely disassociated any single skeleton. A skull from one cemetery might now rest against a femur from another, miles away and centuries apart in origin. This mixing makes it scientifically impossible to reconstruct a single, complete person from the walls. We can learn about the population, but we can never name the individual. We know that many suffered from syphilis, but we cannot point to a specific skull and say this was a baker or a nun who endured it. This is the profound duality of the place. Science can extract the general truths of an era, the harsh realities of medieval life written in calcium and collagen. But the personal narrative, the name, the loved ones, the specific joys and sorrows are forever erased by the sheer, overwhelming scale of the collective. The catacombs offer statistics where there were once stories, a demographic profile of a city written in a language only bones can speak. The scientific data tells one story, but the darkness whispers another. Where the bones fall silent, human imagination rushes in to fill the void with stories, and the most enduring of these is the legend of the Phantom's Ball. It is a tale that perfectly marries the catacombs' grandeur with its inherent sense of doom. According to the lore, in the final, decadent years of the monarchy before the revolution, a group of young aristocrats, bored with the glittering salons above, sought a thrill no one else could claim. They decided to host a masked ball in the catacombs themselves. By candlelight and torchlight, they descended into a vast, decorated quarry chamber. Musicians played, wine flowed, and the nobility danced in their finest silks and powdered wigs, their laughter echoing off the skull-lined walls in a deliberate mockery of death. They were celebrating life in the very heart of the empire of death, but the story takes a grim turn. The vibrations from the music and the dancing, or perhaps simply the rotten luck of an unstable ceiling, caused a catastrophic collapse. A section of the quarry roof gave way, burying the revelers under tons of stone and earth. They were entombed in the middle of their own party, lost to the world above. And so, the legend says, on the anniversary of that terrible night, if you listen very carefully in the deepest, most remote tunnels, you can still hear the faint, ghostly strains of a minuet and see the shimmering forms of the aristocrats forever dancing in the dark. There is no historical record of such an event, no official report of a lost party of nobles. It is almost certainly a fiction, a folk tale that emerged in the 19th century, perhaps as a moralizing parable about the dangers of hubris and decadence. Yet it persists because it feels true to the spirit of the place. It captures the eerie contrast between the vibrant city above and the silent city below, and it warns that the darkness does not tolerate mockery. The Phantom's Ball is not the only whisper in the tunnels. Visitors and cataphiles alike have reported other, more subtle phenomena for decades. The most common is the simple, profound feeling of not being alone. In a side passage far from any other human, you might suddenly feel a cold spot, a pocket of air noticeably chillier than the surrounding damp, as if something had just passed through it. Others speak of hearing faint, indecipherable whispers just at the edge of hearing, voices that stop the moment you hold your breath to listen. There are accounts of shadowy figures glimpsed from the corner of an eye, vanishing when you turn your head, or the unsettling sensation of being watched by the countless empty sockets in the walls. These experiences are rarely dramatic, never the stuff of horror films. They are subtle, personal, and often dismissed as the product of an overactive imagination, the result of sensory deprivation in an overwhelming environment. And that is the most logical explanation. The mind, confronted with absolute silence and the visceral presence of millions of the dead, can easily conjure its own companions. The dripping water becomes a whisper, a draft becomes a cold touch, and the oppressive weight of history transforms into a watchful gaze. But logic does not always quiet the primal feeling in your spine. Whether these sensations are psychological or paranormal is perhaps less important than what they represent. The human need to populate the emptiness, to believe that the story does not end with the last stacked bone. The legends and the chills are a testament to the power of the catacombs to haunt not just our cities but our imaginations. The human urge to create beauty is not so easily buried. Amid the bones and the bare utility of the quarry tunnels, you can find startling pockets of art, sculptures carved with painstaking care into the very walls of the abyss. The most astonishing of these is not a grim memento mori, but a detailed scale model of a Mediterranean fortress known as the Port Mahon sculpture. It was the work of a retired quarry soldier named Francois Décior in the 1770s. Décior had been held as a prisoner of war at the real Fort St. Philip, which guards the harbor of Port Mahon on the island of Minorca. After his release and return to Paris, he took a job with the Quarry Inspection Service. And in his spare time, deep underground, he began to recreate the fortress from memory, using only a hammer and a chisel. For years, he worked alone in the flickering lantern light, carving the intricate bastions, ramparts, and staircases of the stronghold directly into a solid limestone pillar. The result is a masterpiece of patience and memory, a three-dimensional map of captivity transformed into a monument of personal reclamation. It stands as a testament to the mind's need to process experience, to shape chaos into familiar form, even when that form is etched into the heart of darkness. Décior was not alone in this impulse. In another section of the quarries, far from the official ossuary, you can find the Crypt of the Passion. Here, an unknown artist or artists took the raw material of the underground and sculpted it into something resembling a sacred space. They carved elegant, fluted pillars directly from the living rock, creating the illusion of a small, subterranean chapel. The purpose is mysterious. Was it a secret place of worship, a personal meditation, or simply an exercise in skill driven by boredom? We may never know, but the care in the craftsmanship is undeniable. These works and dozens of smaller carvings like crosses, faces, and cryptic symbols found throughout the network represent a profound human contradiction. This is a realm dedicated to the anonymous storage of death, a place where individual identity is systematically erased. Yet within it, individuals felt compelled to assert their presence, to say, "I was here." The quarryman's mason mark was a signature for wages, but these sculptures are signatures for the soul. They are a rebellion against the void, a declaration that even in the empire of silence, a creative spirit can echo. They remind us that the catacombs are not just a tomb, but a canvas where the slow passage of centuries has been punctuated by moments of remarkable, stubborn beauty. That deep human need to populate the emptiness has ensured the catacombs never stay buried in history. They have clawed their way into our stories, becoming a permanent fixture in the landscape of the imagination. Long before modern horror films, the great novelist Victor Hugo understood the power of Paris' underworld. In his epic Les Miserables, published in 1862, the climactic escape features Jean Valjean carrying the wounded revolutionary Marius Pontmercy through a terrifying labyrinth. Hugo describes it not just as a sewer, but as a visceral, living maze, a place of putrid streams and fetid darkness that mirrors the moral and social chaos of the city above. While he calls it the sewer, his detailed descriptions borrow heavily from the known geography of the quarries, those same damp, branching tunnels. For Hugo, the underground was the city's subconscious, where its waste and its heroes both had to travel to find redemption. He cemented the idea of the catacombs as a place of ultimate trial. A gauntlet one must survive to reach the light. This literary foundation paved the way for the catacombs to become a premier stage for cinematic horror. Films have latched onto their inherent dread, using the setting not just as a backdrop, but as an active, malevolent character. The found footage film As Above, So Below from 2014 takes this to a philosophical extreme. It follows a team of explorers who descend into the forbidden tunnels, only to find the labyrinth physically transforming into a personalized hell, reflecting their own guilt and sins. The film brilliantly uses the real, claustrophobic geography to ask a terrifying question. What if the maze is not just stone, but your own mind? Other films, like the 2007 thriller simply titled Catacombs, play on more straightforward fears of being hunted and lost in an inescapable stone prison. These stories work because they tap into a universal anxiety, the fear of being buried alive in the dark with the added weight of centuries of silent witnesses. That interactive fear is where video games truly excel, placing you directly in the navigator's shoes. In the historical adventure Assassin's Creed Unity, set during the French Revolution, the catacombs are a fully explorable zone. You, as the protagonist Arnaud, can parkour across bone-lined galleries, using the ossuary as a secret highway beneath the streets of revolutionary Paris. The game turns the tunnels into a practical tool, a hidden network for the clandestine brotherhood of assassins. It captures the romantic, adventurous side of the myth. In stark contrast, the psychological horror game Layers of Fear 2 uses the catacombs for pure dread. The protagonist, an actor, finds himself trapped on a ship that eerily morphs into the Parisian underworld, complete with endless bone walls and whispering darkness. Here, the catacombs represent the buried trauma of the past, a physical manifestation of memories that cannot be escaped. Whether as a historical playground or a psychological maze, these games prove the setting's versatility, its ability to be both a thrilling space of adventure and the perfect architecture for a nightmare. From Hugo's moral sewer to the personalized hells of modern screens, the catacombs have achieved something remarkable. They have transcended their origin as a solution to a public health crisis. They have been adopted by global culture as the ultimate symbol of hidden history and profound fear. This persistent haunting of our stories reveals a deep truth. We are drawn to this empire of death because it forces us to confront the literal foundation of our civilization, built from both stone and skeleton. It is a mirror held up to the city, showing us that beneath every grand boulevard and illuminated monument lies a silent, parallel world of shadow and memory. And as our stories about them grow ever more elaborate, one wonders what future tales will be whispered in those tunnels, and what new secrets we will project onto their enduring, bone-white walls. Beyond the galleries of stacked femurs lie rooms with a purpose, spaces carved for specific, often solemn, duties. One of the most architecturally striking is the crypt of the sepulchral lamp. This is a circular chamber, a rare geometric shape in the angular quarry network. At its very center rises a thick, cylindrical pillar, but this pillar is not built from stone. It is constructed entirely from carefully arranged bones, a macabre column holding up the ceiling. The room's name comes from its original function. A single oil lamp was once suspended from the vault above this central pillar, its weak flame casting long, dancing shadows across the curved bone walls. This was not a workspace, but a place of ceremony and finality. Historians believe it served as a kind of mortuary chapel, a space where the last rites could be performed for the bones being transferred into the ossuary. Priests could descend to bless the anonymous remains before they were added to the walls, offering a final spiritual gesture in the depths. The single lamp symbolized a vigil, a small, defiant point of light keeping watch in the empire of eternal dark. Not all chambers were for reverence, some were for raw, practical labor. This was the workshop or the atelier. Imagine a large, rough-hewn gallery, not yet lined with the neat bone walls. This is where the grim logistics of the transfer happened. Cartloads of earth-covered, tangled skeletons would be dumped here directly from the cemeteries above. Workers, their faces wrapped in cloth against the dust and decay, would sort through the chaotic piles. Their tasks were methodical and grueling. They would separate the bones by type, cleaning off the clinging soil and remnants of decay. Skulls went into one pile, long bones into another, hip bones and vertebrae into others. This sorting was essential for the stable construction of the hags, the bone walls. The workshop was a factory of the dead, an assembly line in reverse where the chaos of the grave was systematically dismantled and organized into the raw materials for Herakat de Thuri's architectural vision. The floor of such a chamber would have been a layer of fine, gray dust, a mixture of powdered limestone and the last earthly traces of millions of lives. The catacombs' role as a sanctuary evolved with each new threat to the world above. Centuries after the last bone was sorted, the Cold War brought a new kind of fear, the threat of annihilation from the sky. In the 1950s and 60s, with the shadow of nuclear conflict looming, the French government again looked downward. They identified sections of the stable, reinforced quarries as ideal locations for civil defense shelters. One such place, often simply called the bunker, was constructed deep beneath the streets. This was not a makeshift hideout, but an officially built, concrete-lined fortress within the limestone. It was equipped with reinforced blast doors, independent air filtration systems to protect against radioactive fallout, banks of metal bunk beds, and storage for emergency rations and water. It was designed to house and protect hundreds of government officials or essential personnel for weeks, a sealed ark waiting out a storm that, thankfully, never came. This bunker, now empty and silent, is perhaps the ultimate testament to the space's continual adaptation. It represents a shift from preserving the dead from the living city to preserving the living from a dead world they might create above. Each chamber, from the sepulchral crypt to the sorting room to the concrete bunker, tells a different story of human need, whether spiritual, logistical, or existential, proving that this underground realm has always been a mirror to the anxieties and necessities of the age unfolding in the light. The map of the catacombs is a perfect, inverted twin of the city above. For every grand boulevard like Rue Saint-Jacques, there is a corresponding gallery snaking through the dark directly beneath its cobblestones. The very stone that built the houses on the surface was taken from the void that now supports their foundations. This relationship is no accident, it is a direct physical consequence. The medieval quarrymen dug their tunnels in straight lines, following the richest limestone seams, and these subterranean paths often became the blueprints for the streets that later developed overhead. When the city later expanded, builders would sometimes discover these old tunnels and simply build right over them, using the solid ground around them as support. This means you can stand in a tunnel named for the Rue d'Enfer, Hell Street, and know that the traffic of a modern Parisian avenue is rumbling just a few dozen feet above your head. The catacombs are not a separate place, they are the city's basement, its skeletal structure, and its memory all at once. They hold two fundamental elements of Paris, the raw material of its glory and the physical remains of its people. Every stone block in Notre Dame, every facade of the Louvre, every elegant townhouse in the Marais was paid for with a piece of this hollowed-out ground. And when the population that inhabited those beautiful buildings died, their bones were returned to the emptiness left behind. So the catacombs represent the complete cycle, the extraction and the return. They are the hidden cost of the City of Light. All that gleaming limestone, all that architectural splendor that draws millions of visitors, required the creation of a shadow world. The grandeur above is literally balanced on a fragile honeycomb of voids below, a reality the city has fought for centuries to manage. This duality is the catacombs' deepest truth. They force us to see Paris not as a single entity, but as two interconnected cities, one of light and life, and another of darkness and memory, forever bound together in a silent, necessary embrace. What we celebrate in the sunshine is forever mirrored in the quiet, orderly shadows beneath our feet. Standing before that green pavilion on a Parisian street corner, you are about to cross a profound threshold. The official tour is a tightly curated journey, a single, illuminated thread through the overwhelming dark. The path you will walk stretches for about 1.5 kilometers, just under a mile, a distance that feels much longer when every step is taken in the company of millions. The air holds a constant damp chill, fixed at 14 degrees Celsius or 57 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature that seeps into your bones and reminds you this is not a place for the living. After navigating the bone-lined galleries and confronting the silent inscriptions, your exit requires a final, physical trial, a climb up a narrow, spiral staircase of 130 steps. Emerging back into the light and noise of the city is a jarring, almost surreal experience, as if you are being reborn into a world you suddenly see with different eyes. Securing your passage into this underworld requires planning far beyond a casual decision. Tickets for the official Catacombs tour are famously limited and sell out months in advance, especially during peak travel seasons. Booking online as early as possible is not just a suggestion, it is an absolute necessity. Spontaneous visits are almost impossible, a deliberate measure to control the flow of visitors and protect the fragile environment below. This scarcity is part of the experience, a modern gatekeeping that echoes the exclusivity of its early 19th century visitors. While the official route is safe, solemn, and profoundly moving, a dangerous shadow world exists just beyond its barriers. I must offer the strongest possible warning: do not, under any circumstance, attempt to enter the illegal, unmaintained sections of the quarries. The romance of the cataphile lifestyle hides a brutal reality. These tunnels are a maze of pitch-black passages, unstable floors, and sudden drops. Every year, people ignoring this warning become hopelessly lost, their phone lights useless in the absolute dark, leading to terrifying ordeals that require complex police rescues. Others suffer serious injuries from falls in the treacherous terrain. The consequences are not just physical. Getting caught means facing heavy fines and criminal charges, as trespassing in the protected quarries is a serious offense. The story of Philibert Aspert is not just a historical curiosity, it is a permanent caution. The Empire of Death is a place for respectful observation, not for reckless exploration. Your journey should be one of reflection, not a test of survival against the indifferent and unforgiving stone. This journey began with a simple, grim necessity, the need to save a living city from the decay of its dead. From that urgent public health crisis, an empire of shadows was born, an accidental monument that has grown to haunt the world's imagination. The catacombs are a place of profound contradiction. They are both a chaotic ossuary of 6 million anonymous souls and a space of chilling, geometric order. They were created as a secular solution, yet they function as a sacred, silent cathedral demanding contemplation. They are a meticulously catalogued historical archive and simultaneously a living canvas for modern myth, rebellion, and art. Every stacked skull speaks of an individual story forever lost, while the collective wall tells the unflinching story of an entire era. We walk its curated path as tourists, but its true scale mocks our comprehension, reminding us that for every step we take in the light, 100 miles of darkness stretch unseen below. The final, haunting truth of the catacombs lies in that very duality. They are a physical manifestation of time's slow work, showing us that the bustling, vibrant present we inhabit is forever balanced upon a foundation of fragile stone and silent memory. The grandeur of Paris is literally built upon the hollowed-out spaces left by its own construction and populated by the remains of those who built it. It is a powerful memento mori, not just for a person, but for an entire civilization. A reminder that everything we create rests ultimately upon what we leave behind. So what do you think is the greatest mystery still hidden in those dark galleries? Is it the final resting place of a lost revolutionary, the motivation behind a lone sculptor's work, or simply the enduring human urge to explore the darkness beneath our feet? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to join us as we uncover more of history's deepest shadows, be sure to subscribe.